guys, so I'm going to show you how I use and how I make my bobber fishing rig for lingcod, like if I'm fishing off a jetty. This will apply to anywhere from California all the way up to Alaska. So normally I would use at least a 3-ounce bobber, nothing less. And you can see on the sizes of the bobber, this one is not an actual 3-ounce because it's the size of a 1-liter soda bottle. So just to fit on the table, we're using the normal one. So we would use a 3-ounce bobber at least for lingcod. So we use the 3-way swivel. You can attach it to whatever kind of weight you want, whichever style. It just needs to make sure it doesn't sink the bobber when you go to cast. You want it to float. So use the appropriate size weight. Then I do a 3-foot leader at least with a single hook. And you can use a mooching rig if you'd like. There's nothing wrong with that. It just depends on the size of the bait that you're going to use. Now, most of the time, we're going to use this hoochie skirt as an example. Most of the time when we're running this, we're using a herring or an anchovy as the bait, hence the herring rig. And we'll take this one hook and you'll go into the back 1/3 of that bait. You would then hook into it through the spine, have it come out the other side and lay it flat. You're then going to take a couple half hitches, wrapping around this skirt, or the bait in real life. And you're gonna just let that be how you secure it. It's ready to fish then. So of course on your bobber, you're gonna have the bobber itself. I like to add a big bright corky to help see it. I add a smaller bead, and then I always make my own bobber stop so I don't have to worry about it. And I typically like to use 2 on a line to make sure if I'm adjusting it so I can find bottom, I'm not going to have it just continuously keep sliding if the braid is starting to get old. The thing to remember now with this rig is we're chasing lingcod. Lingcod are really known for growing quite large. They also have big teeth. So whether you're from shore or out in the boat, things to remember would be the kind of hooks. The kind and style themselves is not as important, but a bigger wide gap hook is always preferable. That being said, 4/0 size or larger, greater than or larger too, for the size. I'm showing these are 5/0 hooks. The leader line for the hook is 20 pounds at minimum. Typically I'll run 30, but you can get by with 20 for the most part. The other important part though is remember that 3-foot length, because when you're letting your bait flutter around, you're going to have your weight be about a foot or 2 above the bottom. And this allows everything to just flow with whatever current is running by. And that allows that bait to look a little more lively, and you won't have to worry about it as much, and it'll keep it from getting in the bottom and stuck. Again, as we said, the big point here with a bait, let's say if I was using like green label herring, the 1/3 of the way in from the tail, we would go in and then just do at least 2 half hitches through your line. You don't need anything fancy with that. They don't even need to be super tight, but that helps. If it was going to be a black label herring, you're fishing a big reef or something, then I would use at least 40-pound leader, and I would probably run a 7/0 hook. And I would probably use a mooching rig, 2 hooks, one through the head or by the gill plate, and then the other one in the 1/3 area from the tail to help make sure that this thing, as it gets swallowed, both hooks are going to dig in deep. But this is the lingcod bobber herring rig that most people on the West Coast are going to use. So here I have hanging an example of the bobber rig for rockfish, which is essentially you're just going to bobber a high-low rig. So as it sounds, 1 hook above, 1 hook below, and this is not to size that you would normally use. So normally I would have this where it connects to where the bobber is going to be. This is accurate, about 6 to 8 inches or so coming out, and then you'll go at least 2 feet to your next 3-way swivel. Then you'll have your other hook, again, 6 to 8 inches worth of leader. And then I would run at least 2 feet to the weight. And the reason why we make it long is to make sure we actually are getting near the bottom, but we also have a good understanding of where we're actually fishing in the water column. Rockfish can suspend, and a lot of times, whether it's the jetty or whether it's fishing off rocky beaches and crops or reefs, understanding where your bait and your lure and your presentation is going to be very important if you're targeting a specific school of fish. So for our information, we have the Rockfish bobber hilo, right? We just talked about it. Our hooks are going to be the size 2 to a 1/0 for younger rockfish, 1/0 to 4/0 for mature. And you might be wondering, well, how do I know that? Well, I guarantee you, if you're using bait and you start having your bobber go under and fish are taking it, more than likely, you're not going to get the hook into them because their mouths are just not wide enough or large enough to get the hook in properly. So you'll start noticing a bunch of hits, but then you're not hooking the fish. So it can be the other way around too, where they're larger fish, and the issue now becomes that they're gutting it. And let's say you're targeting certain species, or some species you're not allowed to keep. So switching to a smaller size might be able to help you prevent that fish from swallowing it and gutting it. That being said, the leader strength, typically for the younger stuff, you don't have to worry too much. It's 8 to 15 pounds strength. When we start talking about mature rockfish, again, you're not really going to find too many of them around jetties, but the ones off the reefs for sure are going to be more capable of breaking your line if they take a big run. And again, for these leader lines for each of the hook, it's 6 to 8 inches for each hook. The thing to remember though is we talk about rockfish, but lingcod eat rockfish. So if we're talking more mature rockfish, there's usually going to be much, much larger lingcod, anywhere between 20 and 60 pounds, depending on where you're fishing. And they can easily swallow these rockfish whole. I mean, a larger lingcod, I'll show you in a picture, its mouth is the size of a 5-gallon bucket. So it could easily put a whole fish in there, no problem. So this is just one way of doing it for both of them if you're going to bobber fish. And again, this is typically from the shore, but it can be done anywhere from California to Alaska. One little trick I like to add too is we talked about these hoochies, little squirt jigs. You can run a jig right through it. You could run the line and put this over your hook, over your bait, and it'll give attention to. You can add scent on the tails, and it just helps add more attraction. But that being said, rockfish and lingcod are not leader shy fish. They're pretty aggressive. And if it's shiny, fluttery, and has a lot of motion and some scent, 9 times out of 10, you're going to hook your fish without any issues. So hopefully this helps you guys. Good luck. Another tidbit of information that I think is relative, because if you're fishing off a jetty, you're going to be lifting your fish up onto rocks if you don't either have some help or a good net. So rod that you're using for the rockfish or lingcod does matter. I like something at least 8.5 to 10.5 feet long. The action should be a medium to heavy. Kind of depends on whether or not you are targeting rockfish specifically or have encountered or plan on encountering lingcod. So if you're just doing rockfish, medium is just fine. If you plan on ever doing lingcod, a heavy rod with a longer rod tube being 10.5 feet is usually the most ideal. Your main line for your rod and the reel should be mono or braid. You should not be running fluorocarbon ever for your main line in saltwater. It's just gonna degrade badly. So mono, I don't run anything less than 20 pounds for the main line. If it's really rocky stuff, then I like to bump it up to 30 actually. If it's braid though, I will run at least 30, and sometimes I'll even bump it up to 50, depending on the conditions and how rocky it is. So this is just some of my information to kind of help give you guys a good thinking position. Something I wanted to touch on with a lot of wild caught fish is it's very natural when you start to fillet them, and then if you cook them in the fridge for a day or two, you'll start to notice these worms coming out. They're parasites, right? This is completely natural. I'll let you zoom in even. So it's completely natural for wild fish to have these. This is why we have to go through precautions when you're cooking your fish, or if you're going to eat them raw, go through an extra couple steps to make sure it's safe to eat. But I just wanted to show one little tiny example of them coming out. And again, it's natural. Fish eat other fish eat other invertebrates. Almost everything has a parasite on the entire planet. So don't freak out if you see one, just remove it. And if you are going to cook your fish, make sure you cook it all the way thoroughly. So as you can see here, I have 2 fillets from the same fish. This is a Lingcod, and they come in different colors, different variations for their patterns, and that's usually due to their own natural evolution and helping them be able to stay camouflaged along the bottom or along the rocky shores or the reefs. And they can hover, unlike most fish, and stay seated on the bottom. But they're a very thick white meat fish. They're very great eating. If you've never had lingcod, I'd compare it very similarly to halibut, but not exactly the same. It's a little softer, but it's still a great eating fish. And there's a lot of different ways you can cook it. You can bake it, broil it, smoke it. There's all sorts of different ways. But they are fantastic to eat if you get the chance. Now you can see that this side here has been cleaned up, trimmed up. It looks a little more proper. This side has not. And you can see where all this part's starting to separate is because of the excess fat. A lot of larger predatory fish will carry a decent amount of mercury in them. And so typically what I do is I'll trim off this belly fat, and then when I flip over the fillet, there'll be a dark line. And I'll show you that here in a minute. But that dark line holds most of heavy metals, mercury, and stuff like that. So larger fish are going to have that naturally due to where they sit in the food chain. So if you're worried a little more about your health, a great way of removing that possibility is just removing the back fat and the belly fat. So there's a lot of different ways to skin fish and be able to get to that back fat and fillet. So we're just going to make a small incision right here towards the base of the tail. We're going to use that to be able to put our knife straight down, and we're just going to start to use the tip or 1/3 of the blade and just run it straight up. Ideally, you would want to do this on a harder surface, not just a paper towel, but it will work. We'll skip forward ahead so I can do both fillets and just have it done. So as you can see, we have one fillet done. This right here, that red mark off the skin side and right here is the back fat I was talking about. Something else to notice is I have this big sliver now put in here because if you look carefully, you can see these really large, sharp bones. And it's natural to have that because those are the bones that are help connecting the ribs into the spine, especially towards the head of the gill plate area. So these can be troublesome. You can use a pair of pliers and just dig them out. Or if you don't really want to deal with it, you can just take a knife and go on each end of those spines. They'll stick out very large. Cut them out and then be done with that. So all you'll have to do now is just remove some of this back fat and you'll get a cleaner tasting fish. It's kind of like when you go into a grocery store and you smell the fish when you first walk in. Yes, it's old. But the reason why it's old is because this back fat grows bacteria once the fish is dead. They start forming in this area, other than the guts, of course. But if you clean this out, you have a better tasting product. So now that we have our lingcod completely cleaned up, ready to go, we can cook it however way we want. Personally, I'm just going to add some garlic salt to all of them. And I'm going to let them sit outside for about 30 minutes. When I say outside, I mean outside the fridge. Don't be afraid to put some other seasonings, whatever you prefer, honestly. And I'll flip them over and do the same thing. But they are ready to go in about 30 minutes. And so we're going to move on to the rockfish, and it's going to be a very similar process. So here we have our rockfish, and these are called greenling. They're very similar to lingcod in the sense of how the meat is, but they are entirely different species, and they are considered rockfish from California all the way up to Alaska. Believe it or not, it's actually one of the favorite things lingcod like to eat. Once they hit about 20 to 25 pounds, they will consistently target these things and swallow them whole. But they are a great and phenomenal tasting fish. They do come in several different colors, just like lingcod. It kind of depends on the variety of structure. So we have these ones, which have a faded color right now, but you see these big spots are kind of bluish green. They're pretty vivid when you first catch them. Those are kelp greenling because they live near kelp beds. And then these bigger, they'll be black and red marks all over, and they'll be inversed colors too. So red and black or black and red as the dominant colors, but they're called rock greenling because they live along big rocky boulders or reefs that don't have a lot of vegetation, so that helps them blend in. But that's just another kind of rockfish that we're going to be doing up. So now that we have our rockfish and our lingcod prepped, we can season those too if we want, or put them in a bag for the fridge at a later date. I'll probably do a couple small little videos to show different ways to cook them, but that kind of sums it up. So hopefully you guys have a good time and good luck fishing. Okay, now we're gonna check the lingcod that's been smoking for a couple hours. Nice and golden. We like to see that. It means the smoke's been penetrating the meat, adding a lot of flavor. So once you bring in the fish and you break it up a little bit, I like to make a little concoction. I put in about 1/4 worth of lemon juice, 1/4 worth of hot sauce. It could be any kind you like. I'll even add a little bit of cream cheese into it, or some smoked pepper jack, and then make some dip with it. But you can make all sorts of different dishes, and hopefully this will help you guys as well as give you a couple different ideas for when you're cooking your own fish. So we'll leave you with this and hope you enjoy.